This morning I was in meditation and I had this profound voice saying, you need to talk about grief. You need to talk about how you're feeling today, because it was, hello, what are you wanting? It was 8 years ago today that I held my mum's hand for the very last time. And while grief is still like the wave analogy that we talk about, or you've probably heard about, you know, there are still days where it crashes down and there are also days where it's peaceful. I still think that grief is something that we don't open up and talk about enough, especially when it comes to the people that we love and the people that we've lost. And I think sometimes it can get hidden, or we often hide our true feelings about that, because in this very, very busy time and phases of our lives, we have to rush on and get back to being practical and doing. And I know that when I was in a corporate job, you pretty much just got a week if you were grieving the loss of someone, whether that would be, I had a week off after all of my miscarriages, and you know, that's really not enough time to allow yourself to feel all the feelings that come with the loss of an important person with you. Sometimes we might hide our grief in shame because we feel like we should be better, we should be okay, we should be able to move on. And so many people said to me, you know, you should feel relieved. Your mum had Alzheimer's, she's in a better place. But that doesn't allow me to feel the real sincere grief that my mum had gone for the last time. And what I find, and what I found not only with myself, but also with working with other clients who are going through grief, those first few weeks, you're often in a state of shock. You're often fully distracted by all of the organisation that you have to do, that it's actually only a few weeks later that the reality of the grief actually kicks in. And I think it's really important that we bring this conversation to the table. So I wanted to share with you some of the tools and the tips that I've used over the last 8 years to help me keep those big crashing waves at bay, or to at least be able to survive when they do kind of come crushing down underneath me. And they are the tools and the tips that I've shared with clients. And if I've got any clients watching, if I miss any of the tools that I've shared with you and that you find that are helpful, please do share, open up this conversation and join in. And perhaps if I haven't worked with you, you're not a client, and you have been through a level of grief and you have found something that helps, please share it in the comments below so that other people can really tap into this in their times of darkness, in their times of, you know, crushing despair and grief. And I really just wanted to bring this back into everything to do with my brand, which is all to do with joy. And it really can be a real disruptor to our joy. Grief can be a real disruptor to how good we feel. And I'll take you back to 8 years ago. My mum had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's 10 years preceding. So she was diagnosed in the year that James and I got married, in 2005. It might have been even 2004 she was diagnosed. And it was a very slow process, and it almost felt like we were grieving her every time I saw her, as a little piece of her disappeared, whether it might have just been the way that she did her hair, or the way she spoke, or the one time she looked at me, she said, Ali, let me make you a cup of tea. But darling, where do I get the hot water from? And this is a woman who was incredibly smart and she was brilliant in the kitchen. Another time when she Zoomed with me and I had the boys sat next to me, they must have been quite small at the time, maybe 5 and 6. And she looked at me and she said, oh, darling, aren't those twin boys with you gorgeous? And this was coming from the woman whose biggest dream was to be a granny and to really embrace being a grandma and spoiling her grandchildren. And each time my heart broke a little piece, every time that little element of her disappeared. And by 2016, 2016, it was the end of 2015, we put her into a home because my dad could no longer be her primary carer. She was coming at him with knives and beating him up. She didn't know who he was, where she was. It was just such an upsetting time. And for the sake of my dad, we coined an intervention, and she was put into a home where unfortunately she then really was quite disruptive, and she got put into a mental hospital. And once again, that was a really, really hard time where they put her in almost like, rather than putting them in those white suits and straitjackets, she was put in a drug-induced kind of straitjacket where she literally just lost all the weight. She disappeared before our eyes to the point where she was able to go back into palliative care and to be looked after. And I remember just after my 40th birthday, I had gone down to see her. I used to get very upset and very ill after I'd seen her from the emotion. And I went down to see her, and she was sitting there like a little bird in a chair, and I had some carrot puree. I think it was carrot, it was definitely orange. And I was feeding her the carrot, and she wasn't able to take her meds for that day for one reason. And she just looked at me straight in the eye and she said, "I love you, Ali." And then she was gone again. And those were the last real words my mum actually said to me, because just a week later, as I was coming out of the hospital with my eldest son, who had had his leg broken in the school playground, I had a phone call from my dad saying, "Ali, we've got an end of life situation. If you want to come and say goodbye to your mum, you can come, but I also understand if it's too upsetting." Of course, I left Tom with his dad, and I shot straight down on the motorway, and my dad and my sister and I sat vigil with my mum for the next 7 days. And it was through this experience that I started, or I continued my blog at the time. I was blogging at the time about the Ali sandwiches, how I was stuck in the middle of looking after parents and my children and my job and my husband and everything. And it was like, where do I fit into this sandwich that's multifaceted? And I couldn't find anywhere online that could help me understand the process of dying and how long it was going to take my mum to die and what we could expect and what we could look after. So I was doing lots of research online, but not really finding anything. And I was speaking to friends who'd sadly also lost their parents to find out what it was going to be like and what I could expect and what I should do. And they really helped me through that process. So I continued to blog about this and ultimately ended up helping so many other people who have been through or went through the same sorts of things. Just little things like make sure you leave a window open so that when they do go, their souls have somewhere to leave the room from. Another one, a friend of mine said, she'll probably die when you're not in the room. So every time you leave the room, make sure you give her a kiss and say goodbye and wish her well on her way, which over the 7 days, we absolutely did that. And during that period of time, I remember my dad saying to us, he knew that she was going, because on the Wednesday, I remember my dad rang me on the Tuesday, I arrived on the Wednesday, and he said, "She hasn't looked at me, and I don't think she'll look at me again, because if she looks at me, she won't go." So my dad, or my mum, she was there and she stayed. And what's so lovely about the date that she died is that the day that she died, which was actually tomorrow early on the 3rd of February, was actually their 44th wedding anniversary. She wanted to make it. It was the ultimate act of love to stay to celebrate their final wedding anniversary. And that always gives me goosebumps. He always says he knew that she was going because she refused to look at him. And I look back on that time now, and I think if I could say anything, and if I wanted to really relate it back to the joy, there was something that was so profound in the fact that my mum was an incredible energetic force of love. She really loved. When you were with my mum, she loved you. Like, you couldn't not know that she loved you. She was demonstrated it in her physical acts. She poured it onto you. And sometimes I remember my sister and I feeling really quite suffocated by this intense love. And actually I see it in myself with my boys. It's like this intense love. And I think when she died, the biggest grief for me was recognizing that there was no one on this planet who could love me the way in which she did. No one. I know my dad loves me, but it's very different as a motherly, maternal love to a paternal love. And that's one of the biggest things that struck me and that I grieved so much for, was that love. But what it did teach me in her dying was that there is so much life to live before you die. And that was my gift from my mum, to recognise that I had to live. That even though she wasn't there, it was so important for me to live. And in her dying, the gift was the recognition that life is finite, that I will go. And I don't think up until that point it had really sunk in. And I maybe don't think it really sinks into anybody until somebody close to you dies, because then the ultimate recognition is that they have gone. And the second gift that she gave me was the most important one, was that to remind me, in the absence of her loss and of the loss of her love, that my love was so important to give, so that the people around me could feel that love and that know that they were loved by me. So it's with this energy of love and to live, that was the gift of her dying to me. And I will always be grateful for that experience, no matter how painful it was. And yes, grief is a disruptor of joy, but it can also be a reminder of so much joy, because over the 7 days in which it took for my mum to pass, we sat around her bed and lovely people came in to say goodbye, and my dad and my sister and I had lovely conversations, and we listened to podcasts which were brand new at the time, and we got out all of the old family albums and we reminisced about what a wonderful, wonderful life she had. So as she passed, all she heard was the memories of the life and the impact that she had created on us. And I just think that the level of grief that we feel is probably equivalent to the level of love that we had when they're alive. So if we feel bad about the grief that we feel and the depth of the grief, it's only because we had loved so much. And again, that is also a gift that grief gives us, to know that we have loved so intensely. And really, we are so fortunate if we ever have that level of grief, because we've had that level of love as well. So what I really wanted to do today was just tell that story for those of you who haven't heard it before, but also to share with you some of the things that I've been doing over the last 8 years that have really, really helped me in terms of moving through the grief when it is really that big crashing wave, and then also how to anticipate the waves when they're coming, and how I can learn to serve those waves of grief and just ride them as and when they come. And I noted down a few of some of my rituals, and I wanted to try and remember them all, so I hope I have. But one of the first ones, and I think it's probably one of the most important ones that I have recognised, is the importance of reminding other people in your life of the anniversaries. And this is something that I failed to do in the first few years. And it caused me a lot of bitterness and a lot of resentment, because I couldn't understand why the people around me didn't feel the same way as I did, and also hadn't recognised or remembered. But then why would they? Because she wasn't their mum. So one of the things that I was very, very clear to do and to point out to my husband James and to the boys and to people around me is that it's mum's anniversary on this date. Can you put it in your diary? And also it's coming up. And so today, when this morning I was feeling a little bit melancholy and perhaps a little bit short, and I was feeling a bit tired, James recognised that, and he came over and he gave me the biggest hug, and he said, "I know it's because of your mum." And that's one of the very first years that this has actually happened, because I've been reminding him on those dates. And I remember one time I was so furious because he invited loads of people around on that day to have a party, and I was like, this is not the day to have a party. So to stop and prevent those arguments and that those emotions running wild, I would really highly recommend that you just let people know that date is coming up. In the days very shortly after my mum had passed, I obviously went back up north, and I came back to look after my son with the broken leg and various things like that. And I remember listening to Eckhart Tolle at the time, and he gave me a fantastic tip on how to cope with the pain and the suffering that I was feeling in terms of grief, but how also to continue to be a mum and show up for my boys without kind of overwhelming them with my grief and projecting it onto them. And I remember it clearly because I've got such a visual of what he termed the pain body, to help you take a breather from your suffering. It's almost like those crashing waves that come in, and how do you take a breath? And he talked to me. He was must have been in earbuds, because it sounded like he was my friend coaching me, but he's not. He's an amazing author. He talked about this pain body, and my pain body was this imaginary Mr. Blobby. For those of you who live in the UK, if you remember Noel's house party, Mr. Blobby, the great big pink and yellow blobby thing. My pain body was this imaginary pain body of big, colourful pain. So that when I used to go and pick up the boys, I could literally remove the feelings of all of this pain and grief and upset and just hand it over to my pain body and say, can you hold on to this pain for me while I show up for my children so that I can bring some joy into their life, so I can do my motherly duties, and then I will come back and recollect my pain when it's okay to do so. And for some reason that hugely helped me with the grief and being able to show up for my life, to work with my pain body, to allow my pain body to hold my pain, to give me some brief respite, to do whatever I needed to do in the day. So that's been one really amazing tool that I used. Something else that helped me not only through the days of my mum dying and in the lead up to, the during and after, and has always been something that's massively helped me in times of real deep emotional time, is using gratitude. A gratitude journal, a gratitude stone, a gratitude rock, but really feeling into the feelings of being grateful. But not only that, this period of my life and this experience reminded me more than just of gratitude. It reminded me of what I hold most dear, what I hold in the utmost of value. And that's what I always come back to. When things are hard, when things are tough, and they can be at the moment, regardless of whether you're going through grief or not, it is in these really hard times that you work out what is of true value to you. And that at that moment in time and throughout that process, I recognize the value in my family and the value in love and the value of the people around me. So bringing in a real deeper sense of a gratitude practice, not just that I'm grateful for my washing machine today, and I'm grateful for the bin men, and I'm grateful for the sunshine, and I'm grateful for this lovely jumper. I am so grateful for my family, because it's without them I would struggle to live. It's that depth of without this, it would be really hard. And that is what makes me really tap into understanding the value of people in my life and what is so valuable. So the difference between gratitude and value. If you're in a really difficult place, tap into what really, really matters and how much you have of that right now. Meditation was another huge tool that I'd recently learned during that period of time. And just really using that practice of meditation, which is just intentional mindfulness, to bring yourself into the present moment, to ground yourself into this moment right now, because in this moment, everything is okay. In this moment, I'm alive. In this moment, in this moment, in this moment, everything, I have everything that I need. And I remember doing that with my mum when I just couldn't quite understand what life would be like without her. I would bring myself into the present moment and say, she's still here and I'm still loved. And everything is good and I am fine. And then when she had passed, I could move into that whole state of being in the moment and just allowing myself to feel that feeling of sadness or grief, and just to be able to be with it without trying to suppress it or move on, and just using meditation as my medication to help me work through a lot of the grief. Meditation is something that I teach inside of the Calm Clinic. If this is something you want to do and work more on or learn or practice, please do check that out, or find me in my DMs and I'll talk to you more about how I can help you with meditation and mindfulness. But it was so key during this period of my life, which is why after my mum died, I went in and took qualifications and courses to help become a meditation tutor and a mindfulness coach, to help people work through grief, to help people work through turbulent times, whatever that might be. Other things that helped me, recognizing, actually maybe I'll use another one first before I bring that one on, is a friend of mine had been to see a clairvoyant or a medium, and she said she was brilliant and maybe it would help me with my grief if I went to see this medium. So I drove the 90 minutes, 2 hours to go and see this medium, and I got to the door. And I was really, really desperate for a wee. And I opened the door and I said, before we start, would you mind if I went to the loo? And she said, well, before you come in, I just have one thing to say to you. She said, your mum is here. She's in the corner. She wants you to know that she's washed her hair. She's got her teeth in. And she is with an old gentleman with a peak cap. And I literally went weak at the knees because I hadn't said or spoken to anybody about how mortified I was that when my mum was dying in those 7 days, she didn't have her teeth in and she'd never washed her hair. Now, my mum always looked immaculate. She always looked amazing. And I knew she would just be so desperately unhappy about how she looked as she died and all the people seeing her in that state. So for me to hear that through the medium, that she was okay, she had her teeth in, she looked good and she was happy, she was with my granddad, who she really loved, just made me feel so at ease. So from that moment on, I knew that my mum, the spirit of my mum, was always around me and I could call on her at any point in time. So going to a medium, if you're open-minded to do something like that, could be really, really amazing. And then that unlocked the next tip, and the next strategy that I found really helpful in coping was in the recognition that my mum's spirit and her energy could be anywhere at any point in time. I can tap into it, and I ask her for signs all the time. And she is so responsive. It's really quite incredible. So I can tell you so many stories about this, but in meditation once, in one of my earlier meditations, I was doing a guided meditation. My mum came to me in the form of a kingfisher, and it was definitely my mum. Colours and the brightness, and I just felt that it was my mum. So there's been so many times when kingfishers have come to me, and I asked her, we were moving schools for the boys, and I said, oh, Mum, can you give me a sign? I can't find the school that they love. We're going to this last one. Is this the right one? And we were driving up the M1, and just as I was driving along the M1 past a slip road, the most enormous lorry, articulated lorry, came down and pulled off in front of me, and all over the sign and all over the back it said Kingfisher. And it was like my mum was there guiding me, and it came off at the junction that we were guiding off, and it was like, this is the way. And she's done that every single school that we've been to. And I've asked her, Mum, is this the school? There's been a sign for a kingfisher if it's been the right one. And that's where we've gone, and that's what we've done. She's shown up to me as a kingfisher so many times. And I remember telling this story during lockdown when I was talking about grief before. And after that, so many people sent me cards and gifts with kingfishers on. And it was so helpful just to recognise that my mum had a spirit animal. She sometimes comes to me in a Jenny Wren. She loves Jenny Wrens. But my favourite is when she comes to me in music. And her favourite song forever, it was, is it Louis Armstrong? I think it's Louis Armstrong. Armstrong? It's definitely something Armstrong, but We Have All the Time in the World. And I remember in lockdown once, it was the first day the boys were going back to school, and they had left their masks and their COVID tests on the side, and they had to go to school with them. And I was still in my pajamas, having made them breakfast, and James was taking them off to the bus. And I remember going, oh no! And I had to grab the masks and grab the COVID tests, and I jumped into my little smart car, and I was like in my pajamas, and I turned the engine on, and what came on the radio? We have all the time in the world. And it was like my mum was just saying, slow down, darling, it's going to be fine. So I'm a huge believer that my mum is all around. If I can call on her, she'll show up and she'll give me a message, whether that be in the music that plays on the radio, whether it's a kingfisher that comes in or a quote in a book. I always recognise that she's there, always giving me guidance. And that has always given me such peace and comfort. I think the biggest thing is it's comfort. Whether you believe in this woo-woo or not, it brought me so much comfort to know that she's always around, to see this, so that she can see me, she can see the boys, and she's still being a granny wherever she is in the world. And the boys believe in it as well. I could tell you so many stories where she's shown up for us, and if you want to know more, I'll come back and tell another time. But that can be really, really powerful. We keep her alive. We talk about her all the time. So the boys and I talk about her all the time. And I remember just after she died, her birthday's 4 days later. She died on the 3rd and her birthday's the 7th of September. And we decided to make her a cake. The boys and I were making her a cake. They were only 5 or 6 at the time. And I remember sitting with Willie. We were cutting the cake. We were singing happy birthday. And he looked at me so genuinely and he just said, Mummy, you know, we should ring Granny. Should we just tell her and show her what we've been doing? And I was like, oh, darling, I'm so sorry. But, you know, she's gone to heaven and we can't call her. And he just looked at me and goes, but surely she must have her phone on her. And I said, no, darling, she doesn't have a phone. And she goes, well, she'll definitely have her iPad then. And we just laughed and laughed and laughed because it was just so funny and just so innocent. But we talk about her all the time, and there are photographs of her around, and it's just so comforting not to shut her in a cupboard and to not feel like it's a scary thing to talk about. So we definitely keep her alive by talking about her. The other thing I love to do is I love to wear pieces of her jewellery. This is her jewellery. The rings that I wear on my left hand are hers. And I always use all of her things. I wear her clothes quite frequently. We've got lovely pieces of china. You know, there's so many lovely things that we do to keep her alive and around. And I buy her gifts on her birthday, which might sound crazy, but just to just commemorate her. And I bought her flowers today, and she's buried in our garden. I've sprinkled her ashes in our roses. So roses are such an important part of my life, and she's sprinkled on my roses, and I often go and talk to her, and she always comes up as forget-me-nots. Don't you just love that? There are none in the garden except where I sprinkled her ashes. So I just wanted to bring this conversation really to the forefront for anybody who is going through a really difficult time, who has lost anybody who they really, really care about. And just as a reminder that grief can be a real disruptor to your joy, but grief can also remind us of so much joy too. The joy that we had with them, and the depths of our grief and the depths of our despair are also the equivalent of how much we loved. And as I said earlier, in dying, my mum reminded me how to live. And in dying, my mum reminded me of how much love I had felt and how much love I can give so that others feel it as well. So in that spirit of that energy, today I am embracing being mum. I'm about to go off and pick up my boys. We're going to spend the weekend together, and it's going to make me feel good, and I'm going to feel love, and I'm going to live and love my life. And I know she will be around, and she will be watching all of us, won't she, Rocky, and having a wonderful time. So if this has helped you in any way, please do let me know. Find me in my DMs or leave me a comment below. If you know anybody who's going through a really difficult time with grief at the moment, and you feel that this might help them with some strategies to be able to manage this turbulent time and upsetting time, please do feel free to share it with them or tag them below. And with that, I'm going to send you all my love and get in the car.